Genesis chapter 9, verse 24. When Noah woke up and learned what his youngest son Ham had done, he said, "I now put a curse on Canaan. He will be the lowest slave of his brothers. I ask the Lord my God to bless Shem and make Canaan his slave. I pray that the Lord will give Japheth more and more land and let him take over the territory of Shem. May Canaan be his slave." Noah lived 350 years after the flood and died at the age of 950. The descendants of Noah. Genesis chapter 10. After the flood, Shem, Ham, and Japheth had many descendants. The descendants of Japheth. Japheth's descendants had their own languages, tribes, and land. They were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. Gomer was the ancestor of Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. Javan was the ancestor of Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim, who settled along the coast. The descendants of Ham. Ham's descendants had their own languages, tribes, and land. They were Ethiopia, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Cush was the ancestor of Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. Rama was the ancestor of Sheba and Dedan. Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, a mighty warrior whose strength came from the Lord. Nimrod is the reason for the saying, "You hunt like Nimrod with the strength of the Lord." Cush first ruled in Babylon, Erech, and Akkad, all of which were in Babylonia. From there, Nimrod went to Assyria and built the great city of Nineveh. He also built Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah, as well as Rezin, which is between Nineveh and Calah. Egypt was the ancestor of Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Casluhim, and Caphtorim, the ancestor of the Philistines. Canaan's sons were Sidon, Heth. He was also the ancestor of Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Later, the Canaanites spread from the territory of Sidon and went as far as Gaza in the direction of Gerar. They also went as far as Lasha in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboam. The descendants of Shem. Shem's descendants had their own languages, tribes, and land. He was the older brother of Japheth and the ancestor of the tribes of Eber. Shem was the ancestor of Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. Aram was the ancestor of Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad was the father of Shelah and the grandfather of Eber, whose first son was named Peleg, because it was during his time that tribes divided up the earth. Eber's second son was Joktan. Joktan was the ancestor of Almadad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. Their land reached from Mesha in the direction of Sephar the hill country in the east. This completes the list of Noah's descendants. After the flood, their descendants became nations and spread all over the world. The Tower of Babel. Chapter 11. At first, everyone spoke the same language, but after some of them moved from the east and settled in Babylonia, they said, "Let's build a city with a tower that reaches to the sky. We'll use hard bricks and tar instead of stone and mortar. We'll become famous, and we won't be scattered all over the world." But when the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower, he said, "These people are working together because they all speak the same language. This is just the beginning. Soon they will be able to do anything they want. Come on, let's go down and confuse them by making them speak different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other." So the people had to stop building the city because the Lord confused their language and scattered them all over the earth. That's how the city of Babel got its name. The descendants of Shem. 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100, he had a son named Arpachshad. He had more children and died at the age of 600. This is a list of his descendants. When Arpachshad was 35, he had a son named Shelah. Arpachshad had more children and died at the age of 438. When Shelah was 30, he had a son named Eber. Shelah had more children and died at the age of 433. When Eber was 34, he had a son named Peleg. Eber had more children and died at the age of 464. When Peleg was 30, he had a son named Reu. Peleg had more children and died at the age of 239. When Reu was 32, he had a son named Serug. Reu had more children and died at the age of 239. When Serug was 30, he had a son named Nahor. Serug had more children and died at the age of 230. When Nahor was 29, he had a son named Terah. Nahor had more children and died at the age of 148. The descendants of Terah. After Terah was 70 years old, he had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran, who became the father of Lot. Terah's sons were born in the city of Ur in Chaldea, and Haran died there before the death of his father. The following is the story of Terah's descendants. Abram married Sarai, but she was not able to have any children, and Nahor married Milcah, who was the daughter of Haran and the sister of Iscah. Terah decided to move from Ur to the land of Canaan. He took along Abram and Sarai and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran. But when they came to the city of Haran, they decided to settle there instead. Terah lived to be 205 years old and died in Haran. The Lord chooses Abram. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country, your family, and your relatives, and go to the land that I will show you. I will bless you and make your descendants into a great nation. You will become famous and be a blessing to others. I will bless anyone who blesses you, but I will put a curse on anyone who puts a curse on you. Everyone on earth will be blessed because of you." Abram was 75 years old when the Lord told him to leave the city of Haran. He obeyed and left with his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions and slaves they had gotten while in Haran. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram went as far as the sacred tree of Moreh in a place called Shechem. The Canaanites were still living in the land at that time, but the Lord appeared to Abram and promised, I will give this land to your family forever. Abram then built an altar there for the Lord. Abram traveled to the hill country east of Bethel and camped between Bethel and Ai, where he built another altar and worshipped the Lord. Later, Abram started out toward the southern desert. Abram in Egypt. The crops failed, and there was no food anywhere in the land, so Abram and his wife Sarai went to live in Egypt for a while. But just before they got there, he said, Sarai, you are really beautiful. When the Egyptians see how lovely you are, they will murder me because I am your husband. But they won't kill you. Please save my life by saying that you are my sister. As soon as Abram and Sarai arrived in Egypt, the Egyptians noticed how beautiful she was. The king's officials told him about her, and she was taken to his house. The king was good to Abram because of Sarai, and Abram was given sheep, cattle, donkeys, slaves, and camels. Because of Sarai, the Lord struck the king and everyone in his palace with terrible diseases. Finally, the king sent for Abram and said to him, What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me Sarai was your wife? Why did you make me believe she was your sister? Now I've married her. Take her and go. She's your wife. So the king told his men to let Abram and Sarai take their possessions and leave. Abram and Lot separate. The book of Genesis, chapter 13. Abram and Sarai took everything they owned and went to the southern desert. Lot went with them. Abram was very rich. He owned many cattle, sheep, and goats, and had a lot of silver and gold. Abram moved from place to place in the southern desert, and finally he went north and set up his tents between Bethel and Ai, where he had earlier camped and built an altar. There he worshipped the Lord. Lot, who was traveling with him, also had sheep, goats, and cattle, as well as his own family and slaves. At this time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the same area, and so there wasn't enough pasture land left for Abram and Lot with all of their animals. Besides this, the men who took care of Abram's animals and the ones who took care of Lot's animals started quarreling. Abram said to Lot, We are close relatives. We shouldn't argue, and our men shouldn't be fighting one another. There is plenty of land for you to choose from. Let's separate. If you go north, I'll go south. If you go south, I'll go north. This happened before the Lord had destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and when Lot looked around, he saw there was plenty of water in the Jordan Valley, all the way to Zoar. The valley was as green as the garden of the Lord, or the land of Egypt. So Lot chose the whole Jordan Valley for himself, and as he started toward the east, he and Abram separated. Abram stayed in the land of Canaan, but Lot settled near the cities of the valley and put up his tents not far from Sodom, where the people were evil and sinned terribly against the Lord. Abram moves to Hebron. After Abram and Lot had gone their separate ways, the Lord said to Abram, Look around to the north, south, east, and west. I will give you and your family all the land you can see. It will be theirs forever. I will give you more descendants than there are specks of dust on the earth, and someday it will be easier to count the specks of dust than to count your descendants. Now walk back and forth across the land because I am giving it to you. Abram took down his tents and went to live near the sacred trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar in honor of the Lord. The book of Genesis, chapter 14. Abram rescues Lot. About this time, King Amraphel of Babylonia, king of Arioch, of Elasar, king of Chedorlaomer, of Elam, and King Tidal of Goam, attacked King Bera of Sodom, King Barsha of Gomorrah, King Shinab of Admah, King Shemeber of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, also known as the city of Zor, King Chedorlaomer, and his allies had ruled these last 5 kings for 12 years, but in the 13th year the kings rebelled and came together in Siddim Valley, which is now covered by the southern part of the Dead Sea.